I am live. This is a reading out of A Return to Elysium, a small Greek island. It is a far memory book by Joan Grant. She passed away in 1989, and I've read quite a few of her books. This one plays in Greece, 2nd century BC, and she is Lucina in this life. And she is on this island to be educated. She's been there since she was 13. She grew up in a very remote place with only, I think, 2 or 3 other people. Anyway, we are here in chapter 8, and it is entitled Tyrian Purple. I don't actually know what that is. It's a type of purple, I dare say. They had again lit a fire and carried down a jar of wine, but no one talked much, and we sat listening to the waves, too subdued even to sing. Cleon, rather pointedly, I thought, gave me only 1 cup of wine, and did not offer to refill it. Perhaps I had looked as silly as Euripides. Perhaps Cleon had only carried a helpless child because he was sorry for her. It was an uncomfortable thought, and I was glad I had decided not to try to look beautiful. I think I shall go to bed, I said, and stood up, yawning to show that I was genuinely sleepy. Agamemnon went back to the house some time ago, so he will be there if you want anything. We shall all be coming up soon. Cleon sounded kind, but disinterested. The door leading into the room where the men slept was half open. The house was quiet, and I stood listening to the silence, wishing I had waited until we all came back together. Then I heard a small, furtive noise, too loud for a rat. What was it? My heart began to thud, and my legs wanted to run. But in which direction? Towards the beach? Or was the thing outside waiting to grab me if I left the house? Into my room? But there was no way of barring the door, and it might follow me before I had time to escape through the window. I heard the noise again. It was human, and it left my knees limp as asparagus. It was a man crying, the sobs muffled as though he was trying to hide his head under the pillow. Agamemnon having one of his lonely defeats. I was enormously grateful to him for making me feel strong and competent. Dear Agamemnon. I pushed the door wider, and he shouted, "Keep out! Don't come near me! Leave me alone!" "It's only me, Lucina. The others are still down on the beach. Go back to them. Tell them to stay out of the house." "Don't be silly. You know it doesn't matter if you cry when it's only me. Won't you ever learn to be obedient?" There was desperation in his voice. "You silly little fool. Do you want to die? I've got the plague. Won't you even give me the credit for wishing to die alone?" The men were still sitting around the fire, talking in low voices, and they had not heard me running across the soft sand. "We can all stop pretending," I said. "Agamemnon's got it." They stared at me in silence. Then Cleon said calmly, "Is he very afraid?" "Yes, he wanted me to warn you to leave him to die alone. I thought it better not to argue until we were all there. We have got to make him believe that none of us are afraid. Asclepius said courage was the only remedy." "You mustn't go near him, Lucina." I knew Epicurus meant to be kind, but I turned on him as if he had flung a stone at me. "If you want to let fear kill you, it's your own business. But you're not going to kill me. I am the only woman here, and women are better than men at dealing with real things like sickness and death." "But you're so young." "Not too young to have more sense than any of you. I'm going to look after Agamemnon, and if you can all do what I tell you, the sooner you understand that, the sooner we can do something useful to help, instead of my having to argue with you as though you were idiot children." "She's right," said Cleon. "If we made her keep away from the house, it would be worse for her than sharing the danger. It's not a case of what you allow me to do, it's what I have decided." I turned and walked resolutely back to the steps, and I heard them following me, talking in whispers which I was too angry to try to overhear. While they were persuading Agamemnon to be moved into my room, I went to put clean covers on the bed and dragged the chest of clothes through the doorway. At least I could put on a fresh tunic every day, for Asclepius had said it was important to be very clean when looking after sick people. I called Narcissus and told him to bring something for me to sleep on. When he protested, I lost my temper. "Do what I tell you. A sick man is like a child. He mustn't be left alone in the dark." "But I'll stay with him, Lucina." "A man is no use. Can you drive that simple idea through your thick skull?" He shrugged his shoulders and came back carrying one of the pallets, which he put in the corner under the window. Without thanking him, I said briskly, "Now go and get a lamp, 2 lamps, and cut the wicks carefully so they don't flicker." While he did this, I rolled up the rugs and threw them out of the window. I'm not sure why, but I think it was because they reminded me too much of the child Lucina, whom I was trying to forget. Agamemnon did not look very ill, but there was a rash on one shoulder, and his forehead was thick with sweat. Cleon offered to carry him, but he said coldly, "I am not dead yet. You can deserve that courtesy for my corpse." When the others had gone out of the room, he let me tack in the covers and even thanked me for bringing him a cup of wine and water. I sat on the floor holding his hand until he fell into a fitful sleep. Was he going to die? Asclepius had said we should know in 7 days. Did he mean 7 days from the time we came here, or 7 days from the first rash? I wished I had been sensible enough to ask this important question before it was too late. Next day, the rash was no worse and no better. I smeared oil on his shoulder, but that was only increased the irritation, so I washed it off with warm water. He asked me about the rash so often that at last I gave him the silver mirror so that he could see it for himself. He said he would vomit if he ate anything, but I managed to persuade him to drink a little milk, and later 2 eggs beaten up in wine, and though he retched, he kept them down. To keep myself awake, I spent the first 2 nights crouching on the floor beside his bed. I agreed to sleep in the afternoon, so long as Cleon stayed in my place. Epicurus brought me bowls of strong broth and always seemed to have something ready when I was hungry. Narcissus scrubbed the floor several times a day, as though sand and water could kill the enemy who held us in siege. Euripides spent most of his time sitting on the bench by the door, covering sheets of paper with his small, untidy writing. It was not until later that I knew he was composing a funeral ode, in which he had carefully left alternative lines, so that it would fit any or all of us. I do not know whom he thought would read it over the ashes of the last to die. The only time when I was really afraid were while Agamemnon slept and I had no stimulus to make me forget my own fear. I knew now why Mother had seen the child spill oil from the lamp. She had thought of that flame licking up to its hair, the flesh charring in the cruel heat. It was easy to be brave when I had to demand strength to help someone weaker than myself. But at night I could not help looking at my shoulders in the mirror. Was that an insect bite on my neck, or the start of the rash? I was sweating, but the room was hot, or wasn't it? I didn't feel hungry. Of course I didn't feel hungry. How could I when I was so tired? Sometimes Agamemnon was gripped with cold and shivered so violently that I thought he was going to fall out of bed. I sent Cleon to get hot stones, which we kept ready in the ashes of the kitchen fire, wrapped them in a piece of blanket and put them against his feet. After the shivering stopped, he drenched with sweat. I washed him in wine and then rubbed him dry with hot towels. I knew this was the thing to do, for Asclepius had told me it was correct for any kind of fever. When Agamemnon was awake, he watched me all the time, his eyes too bright and very wide. He seldom spoke, except to tell me when he was thirsty or to thank me whenever I did anything for him. In his sleep he muttered about a sword. He seemed to think the sword was going to fall on him. Then his eyes would jerk open and he'd lie staring at the ceiling until I stroked his forehead. I thought he was watching for spiders, but there were no spiders in the room. Or did he see imaginary spiders? Would he have seen them if only I had not been so cruel as to play on his secret fear? Would it help if I confessed that I had brought spiders hidden in my dress? Or would it spoil the little confidence that I was able to give him? The indecision was worse than the lack of sleep, but I reluctantly decided that I could not afford the luxury of sharing my guilt with a sick man. When he was better, I could tell him. When he was better, I must believe it was an only when. The sword, why won't they let the sword fall? I can't wait any longer. Please let the sword fall. The words fell slow as blood from his parched lips. I woke him and gave him a sip of wine, but his eyes did not recognize me. The sword! Why does it fall? Why doesn't it fall? Asclepius had told me that the vision of my mother had been only a resonance to her idea, so strong that it was almost material. Perhaps I could make myself see the sword which was torturing Agamemnon. If I could see it, I might be able to change the pattern, as the child had broken the thread which had bound my mother to this same bed. I stared at the ceiling, but I only saw the cracks in the plaster and the dark patch where rain had seeped through the roof. Perhaps it would be easier with my eyes shut. I was in a great banqueting hall, men and women in foreign clothes. They were all foreigners, and very cruel. A man was sitting in a high carved chair on a dais at the head of the table. Above him was a sword, suspended on nothing, or was there a thread supporting it over his head? The man was Agamemnon, and yet not Agamemnon, as I knew him. He was trying to pretend the sword was not going to fall. It meant more than life to him, for the people to believe he was unafraid. Now I could see the stranger and the familiar man on the bed at the same time. Both were staring up at the sword. The other people had faded into the background, insubstantial as shadows. But both men were real. The sword was real. If I could take the weight of the sword, neither of them would be in danger any longer. I felt myself get up from the floor and walk towards the bed, though I was not conscious of having been told my body to move. I had to grow tall to reach the sword. I could feel it in my hand, cold metal against my palm. The blade was dark, crusted with old blood. I tried to rub it clean, but the stains were too deep. Agamemnon always used the sword to challenge his enemy. Would this sword help him, even though it was brittle with age? I put the sword in his hand and saw his fingers close around the hilt. The hilt was red gold studded with turquoise. Then I was only Lucina, standing beside a man who smiled in his sleep. I dared to rest that night, for I knew Agamemnon was going to get well. He woke before I did, and when he saw my eyes open, he said gently, "I'm not going to die, Lucina. Because of you, I'm not going to die." Then he began to cry like a child cries when it has found something it thought lost forever. Epicurus stared at me when I said that Agamemnon was hungry and wanted a bowl of broth and at least 2 eggs. "And you had better send Cleon to get some fish," I added, "for he will be hungry again before long." "Hungry?" said Euripides. "We thought he was certain to die before evening." "Are you sure he's hungry?" "Would I look so cheerful if I weren't sure? So cheerful that I'm not even cross that you are so unbelieving." Then fear suddenly coiled like a snake. "Where is Cleon? Is he all right?" "Cleon?" said Euripides vaguely. "He was here a moment ago. There's nothing wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with any of us. I had pain in my stomach yesterday, but it was only because I ate some mussels which were a little stale. I feel quite well this morning." And I think I need to stop this here, unfortunately, because of the battery. Sorry. I will read the rest later.